Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. I've received a few inquiries asking me about whether the punishment of hell is eternal or not, and I was sent this article to read through. So I would like to address this claim today, inshallah. I'm not going to go through this article specifically, but I will extract the pertinent points that they brought up and address them, inshallah. Let's begin. Now, before even addressing the points made in the article, I think it's important for us to get a general idea. What does the Quran say about heaven and hell? Of course, the Quran is replete with verses about heaven and hell. But let me share with you Surah 2, verse 80, 81, and 82. This passage should lay to rest the claim that the punishment of hell is temporary. Let's begin with verse 80. It says, "They said, the fire will not touch us except for a few number of days." So as we can see, there's a group of people during the time of the Prophet who made this claim that hell will not touch us except for a few number of days. And what's ironic is that even in traditional Islam today, they say the same thing. The Prophet responds by saying, "Have you taken a pledge with God? If so, then God will not break his pledge. Or do you say about God what you do not know?" Then in the next verse, it says, "Indeed, whoever gains a sin and is surrounded by his mistakes, those are the people of the fire. In it they will abide." So this alone should lay to rest this claim that is being made that hell is only temporary. No, God here is very clear that whoever gains a sin and is surrounded by his mistakes, that is, your sins have outweighed your good deeds in the hereafter, those are the people of the fire. In it they will abide. Hum fiha khalidoon. Okay? In the next verse, the same is said about the people of paradise. Those who believe and do good works, they are the people of paradise. In it they will abide. The same terminology is used for both groups. So it is obvious that we cannot make an exception to one group or the other, since, of course, the same terminology is used. Hum fiha khalidun, in it they will abide. So this passage should lay to rest this claim that is being made. But again, allow me to address the pertinent points made in that article. So the article starts off by defining the term khalidoon, which is often associated with the hell and heaven. And as we can see in this passage, God says, those are the people of the fire. In it they will abide. Hum fiha khalidun. So the word khalidun is translated as abide. And the same applies for the dwellers of paradise. In it they will abide. Hum fiha khalidun. So the question is, what does khalidun mean? So let's start with the lexicons. In Maqayis al-Lugha, it says it means athabat wal-mulazama, which means stability and adherence. And it's important to understand that when we are identifying or defining terms from the root, it's important that we take the root and put it alongside, in parallel, in cross-reference with the Quranic text. And so when we look up the root khalada in the Quran, we will see that every occurrence refers to eternity. So khalada from the root means stability, adherence, that is forever, eternity. This is important to understand. So when God says, hum fiha khalidun, in it they are khalidun, they are abiding, this abiding is forever. And we can get a confirmation that khalada means eternity in the Quran. If we go to Surah 21, verse 34, here it says, "We did not grant to any man before you al-khuld." Al-khuld. So if you die, would they be khalidun? So this teaches us that khalada from the root means eternity. It's a stability and adherence to something for eternity. So God, when He tells us, hum fiya khalidoon, it means they are abiding in it forever by default. This is the root definition of khalada. Another term that the article defines is the word ebeda. God says, khalidina fiha abada. We already defined the term khalidina. He says, abiding therein abada. Here, abada is translated as eternally. And what's interesting is that the usage of khalidina only applies both to heaven and hell, and the usage of khalidina fiha abada is also used for both heaven and hell, so there should be no exception. 4:122 talks about paradise, and he says, abiding therein eternally, khalidina fiha abada. And in verse 169 of the same surah, he speaks of hell, and he says, abiding therein eternally, khalidina fiha abada. So now the question is, what does ebeda mean? Ebeda in Lane's lexicon means to remain in a place without quitting, to be in that place permanently. The same is applied in maqayis al-lugha. And if we go to corpus, we see there's 28 occurrences of the term ebeda, and every single occurrence here refers to everness, if that is an actual word, in the sense that being forever in a place, or I will never go there, something along those lines. So now the question is, well, if khalidina means to abide forever and abada means forever, why the redundancy? Well, it's not a redundancy in actuality, because again, khalidina refers specifically to be in that position. Abada means to be in the situation. It's like me saying, you will stay in this room, versus you will stay in this room forever. So it's departing the same message, but when God says khalidina, it's like saying you are staying here. And then if I say khalidina fiha abada, you are staying here forever. So in either case, both of these, whether it's khalidina only versus khalidina fiha abada, they both apply to heaven and hell, so there should be no exception. So again, abada means eternity. Now, as I read through the article, I ultimately saw two primary verses an attempt to support the theory that the punishment of hell is temporary. So I'm going to address these two verses. The first verse is Surah 78, verse 23. In Arabic, it reads, لَابِثِينَ فِيهَا أَحْقَابًا, translated as they will be in it for eons. So the Arabic word ahqaba is translated as eons, which means it's a long time, but technically speaking, it's still limited. Likewise, if we go to the different translations, we will see they translate it as long time, ages, many years. So again, it's a long time, but it can still technically be argued based off of the translation that it's limited. So what does ahqaba mean? First of all, we see that there is another occurrence of the term in Surah 18, verse 60, where Moses says, I will not stop until I reach the junction of the two seas, or I spend a lifetime hookub. Here it's translated as trying. So what does haqaba mean? The root, what does it mean? So let's go to Lane's lexicon. Here we see that haqiba means to suppress something. Here it's in the context of a camel's urine. When it suppresses its urine, it is in a state of haqiba. So haqaba means to suppress or withhold something. Here it says, instead of rain, it was delayed, was withheld. So haqaba means to withhold something or to suppress something. This is the root definition. And what's interesting, even in modern Arabic, we call a bag or something that holds clothes as a haqib. Okay, so if we go to maqayis al-lugha, we see it says yadull ala al-habs. It literally means it indicates entrapment, some form of entrapment. So again, we are talking about suppressing, withholding something. So this is what the root definition of haqaba means. So why are they translating it as eons or ages or years? Well, because some other, in the lexicons, they also say haqaba means 70 years. Others have said 80 years. Others have said many years, which indicates, again, something that's a long time. But again, we're going to focus on the root definition. Now, if we understood ahqaba as something temporary, then this means it's going to contradict all the other verses that say that hell is eternal. Khalidina fiha abada, right? So we know that ahqaba cannot mean, oh, it's temporary. No. So what does this mean? Well, all we have to do is input the root definition to gain a perspective. They abide therein entrapment. Okay, something along those lines. And this entrapment obviously refers to you are entrapped in time in hell. Imagine that you are suffering by the minute, every minute, and feeling every minute of the situation. And it's ahqaba, it's an entrapment of that time. It does not mean you're going to be there temporarily and leave. It means you're going to, the recurrence is going to keep happening. Ahqaba, you're entrapped within it. This is what this the word ahqaba from its root means. And if you go through the Quran, you will see situations where the dwellers of hell, they try to get out, and then they are brought back in. That is ahqaba. They are entrapped. Their skins are burned, and it's rejuvenated and burned again. That is ahqaba. So again, you're entrapped within a situation, within a certain time frame or situation or something along those lines. Likewise, in 1860, when Moses said, "Aw amdi huquba," or I spend huquba, it doesn't mean I'm spending 70 years or 80 years, something vague like that. No, he's saying I'm going to keep trying until I do it, until I succeed. He's not saying I'm going to do it and then give up after 70 years, right? So that's what ahqaba means. It doesn't mean 70 years or 80 years or something limited. It means it's a recurring thing that you are entrapped in, and it will keep happening. This is what haqaba means from the root. Now, the second verse that the article talks about is Surah 11, verse 107, where it says, "Abiding therein as long as the heavens and the earth exists, except for what your Lord wishes." Now, of course, also traditional Muslims quote this verse to support, an attempt to support the idea that hell is temporary. Because it says, "Illa ma sha'a rabbuk," except for what your Lord wishes, it indicates that some people may be getting out of hell. But there is a problem with this idea, with this interpretation. There's actually a few problems. The first problem is that if we said, because God says, "Illa ma sha'a rabbuk," except for your Lord wishes, it means that hell is temporary, it obviously contradicts all the other verses that insist that both heaven and hell are permanent. Okay? The second problem is that if we are applying the phrase, "except for your Lord wishes," if we are applying the logic that they're proposing here, they must do the same for paradise. In the next verse, God speaks of paradise, and he says, "Abiding therein as long as the heavens and the earth exist, except for what your Lord wishes." So does this mean that those who enter paradise will exit paradise and go to hell? Obviously not. So that's the second problem. The third problem is that if we are to read verse 108 again, at the end, he says, "a giving without end." عطاء غير مجدود. A giving without end. So the fact that God says a giving without end for this verse, okay, it means that this verse in no way implies that paradise is temporary. And because the phraseology is the same as that for hell, we can apply the same logic. It means this verse about hell is not talking about something temporary? Not at all. So those are the three problems, the primary problems with interpreting that this verse is talking about something temporary. Not at all. So now the question is, what does it mean, and why does God say, except for what your Lord wishes? Why does he say that? What does it mean? That's the question we need to answer. So what's interesting is that we see the same phrase in Surah 6, verse 128, also for the people of hell. He says, the fire is your dwelling, abiding therein, except as your Lord wishes. So what does this all mean? Why is God saying, except for what your Lord wishes? Well, we need to understand the context. We need to understand that this exception is in reference to the principal idea of entering heaven or hell. Like we go to Surah 10, verse 49, right? Here the prophet says, I do not possess for myself any harm or benefit except what God wills. So he's talking about harm coming to him. And that harm cannot come to him except what God wills. So this is the principal idea. So likewise, when God talks about hell and heaven, he's talking about the principal idea here. He says, as for those who are distraught, they will be in the fire, except for what your Lord wishes. So this exception is in reference to the principal idea of entering hell in the first place. Remember, if a person enters hell, they're in there forever. They're not going to exit. But here, when God says, except for what your Lord wishes, it's in reference to the concept of entering hell in the first place. So what this means, that on Judgment Day, a person who is actually destined for hell may not enter hell after all, because there's an exception. God says, except for what your Lord wishes, right? Likewise, okay, that's a mercy from God, but unfortunately, there's another end to this, the other end of the spectrum. The same applies for paradise. As for those who are happy, they will be in the paradise, abiding therein as long as they have the earth, except for what your Lord wishes. So people, as we know, there are some verses in the Quran that talk about people who believed they have done well all their lives and they were good and so forth, but on Judgment Day, they end up in hell. So God here is telling us some people who were supposed to be destined for paradise do not enter paradise, because God says, except for what your Lord wishes. Okay? So as we can see, the exception that is made here is not in reference to having a temporary abode in hell. Not at all. There's a problem with that type of interpretation. But the exception that is mentioned here is in reference to the general concept of entering heaven or hell from the first place. Now, keep in mind, my brain was really racked with this verse for a while, because I didn't understand what it meant. And I actually went through a lot of tafsirs and different interpretations and takes about what this exception means. But to me, this phrase applies to the principal idea of entering hell or paradise in the first place. And to me, this makes the most sense, as obviously this interpretation does not in any way contradict all the other verses that are mentioned in the Quran about heaven and hell. So I pray this has helped you understand that those who abide in hell will be in hell forever. They will not exit hell, and the same applies for the dwellers of paradise. Wassalamu alaikum.